Anna, quick question for you. Um, how would you describe your space? The space that, because I feel like your conception of space is like very germane to you, and I'd love if you could expound on it a little bit. Like you're doing some things that are not necessarily akin to linear perspective, and the more your work gets mature. I know I was always suggesting Paul Finiak, but just a while ago when I was seeing your work, I started to see a little bit of Roche in it. So I just wanted to hear from you.
Uh, I mean, many of them are like in the house that I live in right now, like this one. And then this curtain. Mm,
Sorry, Anna, I think that's a little bit of a literal answer, because like
Yeah, I'm looking for a more philosophical
all
answer.
of these spaces skew, everything's falling off the side, like there's this weird keystoning off the side. Every
Or
archway.
the top is big, or the top is like the perspective like is flipped. You know what I mean? So I'm wondering what kind of logic she applies to it too.
Usually, I know when a reference, like if I have a reference picture, I know, oh, that's going to be a background one day.
Hmm.
Like I like when it's like when there's like frames. But then I don't know, I kind of let myself do it wrong on purpose. Like,
I want to make one comment about the triptych and then turn it over. I'm not going to talk the whole time, but I want to make a comment to the first years that if you have tough crits this week, which you may, it's very likely, this is why. Because the progress, Hannah, I'm thinking about your crit from the last intensive. I mean, when you said, I wrote it down, you said that you felt like a completely different artist. You sound like a completely different artist. The presentation, the reason I cut in, it was long, but it's because you have a reason behind everything you're doing. I mean, that's what we're looking for. You can justify all these choices that you're making, and that's just exactly why we have this program. The one thing I want to say about the triptych, which is I think it's so much more successful than it was when I saw it in the summer. And I know you mentioned that framing as kind of a Renaissance element, but to me, what that did was it took it out of that context. And we are not in the Renaissance. We can allude to these things, but you don't want to pretend like we're not pretending to be Van Eyck, because I know that's not what you're doing. But the way that first of all, the color of that, I don't know how you come up with that, but I really think it's exactly right. And the way that the contour is being broken versus the flatness of that literal picture plane that you put around it is it makes it so much more contemporary and so much part of I mean, I could see this in Chelsea now, and I think that is not always a compliment, but in this case, it's a compliment. So I'll turn it over so I don't keep. Oh, I couldn't resist saying one last thing about the version of this that is the necklace without the middle piece. Because it has the hanging feet, and then Anna, because I've spent a lot of time with Anna's work this semester, has the hanging foot in one of her pastel drawings. And I feel like you guys have such a fascinating symbiosis kind of in all three of your works, but also the way that I'm including Mackenzie too, but also these secret attributes that you're giving your cohort, that those are the same as Anna's secrets in her work. And I just think that that's really interesting how much you guys make work that speaks to each other. And now I will turn it over. But I did want to congratulate you, because that was a really good presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, this image especially, I think I agree with Christopher. I think that sort of the core of a lot of the themes that I see developing very strongly in your work. And when you first said something about wanting to include you were talking about shadows or including the reference to someone in some of your photographs, and I was wondering why. And then when you talked about, when we looked at your self-portrait in that place that's sacred to Mormons, I don't know if it's sacred, but it's an important historical site for Mormons, and also your friend in the space of your grandfather's farm, you're intruding, right? You are taking something forbidden, right, and placing those bodies in places if they're allowed to be there, they're not allowed to be there appearing the way that you have chosen portray them. And I think that's really powerful.
Does that represent, are you trying, you know, when you like the self-portrait or the, when you place yourself to, I want to pick up where Inez was, are you trying to be provocative, defiant? Is there, you know, rebelling against the system? You know, it seems like that is also, you know, present, that, you know, provoking a response from, you know, like who's going to see the work, right? And then it might be part of the question is your audience, like, is it going to be displayed in Utah, and where people will have a different response, say, perhaps than, you know, in a major metropolitan area that Mormonism isn't maybe so present? You know, is it, are you looking for like, oh, I'm daring, you know, I'm defying the system kind of thing?
Yeah, those are great questions to think about.
Do you feel that they're provocative, Mackenzie?
Let me just say, I didn't mean provocative in a sensual way. I meant
Right.
No.
in terms of
Yeah.
a political system
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, I do actually. And I think a lot of that is because I'm still living in this community that is like heavily dominated by people who are in that practice. And we talked about this a little bit on the talk with Alex yesterday. Just like making this work in a place where it feels like I might be one of the only ones. So what was really interesting is as I was reaching out to people to photograph, I have found such a community of people who are all in the same place and who all are so interested in doing something like this. But you know, my whole thing is everything has been made before already. So that's so defeatist.
Well, it's not so much that you don't. Let me be clear on that. It's not like because Olafur Eliasson uses mirrors that none of us can ever use mirrors again. You know, I think it's about intentionality and just knowing what's out there so that you're not. You won't know who this is, but Jim Daniels was a guy I went to grad school with who was like unwittingly remaking Bruce Nauman pieces all the time because he wouldn't open a book. So he, you know, I would go into a studio and be like, Christopher, check out this cool thing I made. I'm like, yeah, Nauman did that in '75, buddy. Like, yeah, it's cool. It was cool back then too. Not saying that you're doing that, but just so you know, like, so if someone's like, oh yeah, that reminds me of a Julio Leparc piece, you can be like, oh, well, yes, I know all about Julio Leparc. Not that you have to be an expert in everybody that's out there, but just so like, you know, you're kind of aware of some of that trajectory, you know.
And there are other materials that you can use. Actually, I've been looking at recently as well, is that there are other sorts of beyond salt. There are other liquids and grains that, you know, granular structure that can help influence the way the paint responds to, you know, that I don't want to call not as a resist, but it responds to it. It's like a, you know, and maybe sort of allowing serendipity or the interactions to guide, you know, to be more present and work from there as a way of just letting go a little bit more and you know, seeing what can be happen without maybe not every aspect being planned out, right? And I'm not sure, but I do get a sense that in many of the pieces it's very planned, right? Like I'm not sure if it happens in the moment as you're working or not, but it, you know, allowing a little more freedom in the materials process to be more present as opposed to this is how it has to look, this is how it has to be, this is what I wanted it to be, right? Just being a little more open to what changes can happen as you're working, letting it happen organically.
I mean, then it becomes almost like a collaboration with that material, you know. There's this artist, DM Whitman, that does some stuff like that. And
I've heard of her. She's pretty damn good.
I haven't heard of that one. Jeez.
That rings a bell, I think.
It's okay. Like
from Texas or
In
something.
notable museum collections. I mean, she's definitely someone to know.
But on the contrary, many residencies are free and some even pay you a stipend. So you'll want to really apply for these residencies with keeping an eye on the fellowship deadline, application deadlines, as well as keeping an eye on, oh, there's like an early bird special. If I apply early, then the fee is free or $5 rather than $25. So there's ways to keep it really, really cheap. A really wonderful resource is NYFA, so NYFA. You do not have to be a New York resident to enjoy the benefits and resources of the NYFA webpage. Of course, some are really super New York centric, but others are national and even international.
You know, then there's another axis on this, which is the actual market demand. So ideally, you're an artist. I think the best case situation, which is also the most rare, from my perspective, is that you're creating art that is the kind of work that you want to make. It's purely your own inspiration. It's a purity of idea, and there's a market for it. There are other artists who take more of like a barbell approach. They have some work that is more true to what they want to create. They have some work that's more commercial. They sell the work that's more commercial sort of to fund the work that they want to do that's more challenging and may not have as much of a market. I'll give you an example. There's an artist who we work with who's an abstract artist named Thomas Hammer, and he creates these kind of black and white gestural ink paintings on paper that are very popular. He can paint them relatively quickly, and at the same time, he creates very different work that's almost like more 3D relief, sculptural, minimalist, think kind of like Donald Judd meets Figma, that has almost no market at all. So within his own studio, he's kind of diversified between the work that has a market and funds what he wants to do, and the work that he wants to create that doesn't really sell, but he still finds joy in making.
It's a little strange to see this realm of art history and then it also go to your cat and then go to some other things. The only thing that I'm seeing that's kind of the thread running through this is your process. And in terms of kind of reduction or often reduction or layering. And when it comes to cutouts, I would say the quality of the X-Acto work around a cutout is as important as anything that you're painting. Every single slightly, like you can see on the upper left there where there's some really harsh cuts. There are some people who spend years refining, getting, like in collage and others, so that those bright white edges don't show, or so that the cutout is exactly, doesn't have those real almost 90-degree turns within them. To read is something natural, to read is something that has its own power on top of painting. It really needs to be as equally as refined. And that's just something I want to point out. I worked with a guy who's not doing collage anymore, Javier Pinon, ages ago, and he cut out all these snakes from magazines to create Medusa heads, and you could not tell that they were cut out and layered at all. It was just, in this case, you want to know that they're layered, but the cutout should really be as beautiful as anything else in here. And I feel that they just lag a little behind. I think it's a new process, and the layering is something that's coming about, and it's a little more successful in some instances than others. This is the one where I noticed there's a lot of the leaf forms don't feel as natural as what I'm seeing in the background. And I am really getting a sense of an homage to an earlier period in all of your works, except for maybe the last one, because they do carry that vibe partly in terms of scale and partly in terms of palette and subject matter. They do convey what the inspiration you're taking them from is really present in here. And at some point, you really need to separate you take an inspiration and make it a little more different.
we cannot talk about site responsive work without talking about Wolfgang Tillmans, and his exhibition at MoMA had been delayed for a couple of years because of COVID, and it finally opened. It is massive. He's the daddy of installation in photography. Every camera you can think of, every format, every size, every printing strategy with different sizes of papers, every installation strategy, hinges, framed work, taped work, photocopies, everything is in there. Not a single hang line is consistent, but it's all so carefully constructed. There are these moments in the gallery where you can see that there's actually a rhythm to what you're seeing, and you start to put things in relationship, like the one photograph that's in the rear back with the photograph on the left that then becomes to feel like a portal within a portal. The vitrines are all at different heights and they're not bulky. There's a lot of thought that goes into this. And of course, it's MoMA, and they did have the little tiny models to play with for about 3 years before they executed. But it is in these brilliant moments that I thought, that are often dismissed, that the brilliance of Tillmans is often found. There is a one on the picture on the left. That is the side wall that divides the first room. It's about 7 inches maybe wide. The wall is immense, like the first photo that we saw. But at this very moment, you have 2 very modest 4x6s that have a beautiful conversation with the works that are way in the back. And it's often dismissed because people are just walking out. The show was so huge and so overwhelming, but it was like, wow, that is, that's the good stuff. And of course, which is not new, but I had to make the photo of the emergency exit door, which was also integrated. It's like, let's hang something here. It was interesting because I took my freshman class of black and white to see the exhibition, and they wanted to do something responsive to it. And sure enough, somebody hung work on the wall, on the door of the classroom instead. It's like, yes, they get it, because sometimes, and of course, they probably didn't have the same level of thought as Tillmans did, but these opportunities, when are just given to you, it's a way to really create work that is responsive to the site and elevate it, which is the intention.
So there's like a lot of dense research that kind of goes into that, and then kind of is able to produce these sort of materials as these after effects, or these monuments to it. And are really about senses and smells. So she's also really interested in spices, and again, sort of the way that smell and sense become part of olfactory senses, become part of like history and how we like identity. And so these were actually, when you walked into the gallery, you could like smell these things, right? So what are the unexpected maybe materials that are latent or in your subject matter that might be called upon to try? Because you never know what actually will be the thing that really speaks and kind of works in dialogue with ways that you're thinking.
This was created for the CMCA in 2021, and it's titled Use Your White Voice. So again, I'm able to kind of put a statement out there that normally these things are very personal. In this case, I'm so happy that Tim was on board with this, because kind of pitching this idea, I was like, yeah, all right, here we go. But this spoke to the idea of code switching. So I grew up here in Portland, Maine, as a Black man, of course, and there's a lot of, I don't know if you're familiar with the phenomenon of code switching, but it's essentially altering your voice or your demeanor to kind of assimilate with the kind of the powers that be, or the larger group, the majority. It is something that was pretty prevalent in my life, and especially kind of growing up here. And when I kind of was going inward and thinking about it, it was kind of like, this this was a means of survival and making sure that I was, kind of safe, especially in dealing with police. I do not speak with them the way that I would speak with my friends. Or when I worked a corporate job for about 10 years prior to jumping over to this side. And in those boardrooms, I was a young Black man, which was I'm normally one of, everyone in the room. So I had to kind of be aware of and know how to present myself. I don't want to say accepted, because that's not what the aim was. It was just to be kind of respected and seen kind of as the human being that I am.
So I'm always interested in that aspect of decorativeness, collage, but also the purpose of that, because a lot of these are in religious spaces or in like huge like palaces and stuff like that. And then also very interested in the interior aspect of Delft tiles and or decorative elements in different culture. For example, the top two, one is in the Netherlands now. It's like a Dutch fireplace. It's extracted from someone's wealthy, like their home, into the museum. So you see the Delft tile is 4 by 4 inch and it's covered the entire wall. And then the right one is like a Mexican kitchen, which is like has their own distinctive style, but it creates such a beauty in the space. And then of course the bottom is painting by Jean Vermeer that has like a depiction of Delft tiles because it's so common in the household at the time. The left hand side is actually very interesting because it's basically a drawing in India, like women drawing in front of the house to create like this protection or creating a sacred ground. So decorative can mean something different in different culture, in different like way of perceiving image. And
this is a good example of what I was doing. It's based on an image that I'll show you in a moment. This is another painting based on on the same image. I was combining film stills at the time that this is I think this is from 2010. So this is a couple of years later. And this is the film still that it was based on primarily. It's from the 2000 film Final Destination. And it's, which I don't know if you've ever heard of that film. It's sort of it's a horror movie about just these unlikely accidents that people succumb to. But what I liked about it was there's these moments that the body is sort of abstracted by special effects, and it's almost like a literal example of something being in between representation and abstraction to me. So I used this in these previous paintings, as well as other film stills. I was doing this kind of layering together to kind of create compositions. But yeah, so I think in this scene there was a bus hitting somebody, and it just seems so painterly to me. I think it's very interesting, like, and it goes by in such a flash that you don't even really register it with the naked eye. So I was using a DVD player to slow down the sequences frame by frame, and then taking those into Photoshop and layering them together, and then making paintings based on those Photoshop composites.
I will begin by reading excerpts from my swim journal, which I began in April of 2020. So this is under the theme of water. During the beginning months of the pandemic, I relocated with my partner and 2 of our almost adult children to San Diego after our sudden exodus from New Zealand on March 22nd, when the borders were closed to travelers. We flew nonstop to California to be near my in-laws, who are both nonagenarians. Those 6 months were a strange and melancholy time. I set myself up with a desk among the cactus plants in the family backyard and worked on paintings and wrote. The beaches were off limits when we arrived, roped off as if they were a scene of a crime. As soon as they reopened, I was determined to swim distances. In the ocean. I slowly eased into the daily routine of swimming towards the Children's Cove from the shores. My longest swim was 2 miles. Part of my routine was to write about the experience in my swim journal. which became an archive of marine sightings and notes on perception in order to make sense of what I was seeing and feeling. It was also a way to cope and to move through fear and anxiety about the ocean, existential worries about being a speck in the universe, and more quotidian stresses from reading the daily news with the pandemic spreading across the globe. I have been an avid pool swimmer for 30 years, but this was the first time I was out in the open water.